getting deals done. I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with everyone before we get started. If you haven't seen them already, the bright green doors are the restrooms on the hallway. If you need to take a phone call, there are 2 stairwells on either side of the building. You're welcome to head in that direction. For those of you that haven't been with us before, you are in the Community Investment Collaborative space. Community Investment Collaborative is a nonprofit that works with entrepreneurs and helps them access capital as well as education programs. They have a signature 16-week workshops. They have over 500 graduates, have done several millions in loans, and also have grants. Are you able to hear online okay? Any thumbs up? Thumbs up if you can hear.
I can hear.
Thank you. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Willie. And CIC is also the host to the Central Virginia Small Business Development Center at the other end of the hall, which is also a nonprofit, provides free training, business development resources and advice, that has a number of technical and business advisors and mentors and numerous programs that are offered through the state of Virginia SBDC. So that's the space you're in. Welcome. We're glad you're here. You will not be towed despite the signs. You may have gotten that note. So no, nothing to worry about there. I did want to share a little bit of my personal experience having been a deal lead. When I first joined CAM many years ago now, it's been quite a while, I had done due diligence for businesses before, but not as an angel investor. And when I first became a deal lead, I really wanted some help. So Craig Redinger, who is going to speak to you tonight, provided a lot of help, guidance, advice, did some meetings with me. Actually, Art Watson Jr., who is president of CAM's father, also joined me for one of the companies that I did due diligence with. And not only did I get to know these gentlemen really well, and we developed a nice relationship and friendship, but got to know the entrepreneurs quite well. And 2 of those entrepreneurs, we didn't close the deals on, but it was still a great experience. One of them decided at the last minute to remove her technology, the IP, from the company. So that, of course, was a deal killer. The second one, it was a really interesting company that got a lot of attention, as did the first, actually. We had a lot of investors interested, but the second had a lead investor that had terms that weren't very friendly for other investors. So we didn't end up closing on that deal, but have had several others where I did close the deals. We've syndicated the deals, doing basically sharing the information with other angel groups to get the round closed, and have gotten to know other angels, have gotten to know lots of people within CAM, get to share what you learn and the insights of the company. And I still have great relationships with those entrepreneurs, and we still stay in touch, and we haven't had an exit yet, but we're hoping. So anyway, that's been my personal story. It's so much fun to be a deal lead, to get to know the entrepreneurs, to get to know the members of CAM better. So I just wanted to share that with you. And Tracy, did you have a couple of announcements before? All right, and you'll introduce Craig?
I will.
All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tracy Green. I'm one of the founders of the Charlottesville Angel Network, and I am the executive director. You'll also see I wear another hat throughout the ecosystem. I'm also the executive director of the Charlottesville Business Innovation Council, which is our technology council in the community. A few announcements. If you're a CAN member and you're here because you really want to learn how to do due diligence from that perspective, I do have a few of these booklets. I have 3 left, exactly 3 left. They are really old. These are from 2017, but there is still some valuable information in here that deals with GUST, which is the platform that we use to manage our group. And 2 more things. Rebecca Haydock and her group here at Central Virginia SBDC are putting together this really phenomenal workshop on international trade, specifically for businesses that deal with technology and have technology business that you could have a global market in mind. And the QR code's on here, and this will take them to the website, right? Is registration open already? Very good. So this is officially launched. There are several of these flyers over here if you want to come grab any. And then also, Venture Central is another organization in town, And I'm working with them through the Charlottesville Business Innovation Council and the Charlottesville Angel Network, and we're partnering up with them on an Angel Academy, which will be even more workshops and training to help people, especially females and persons of color, get involved into the investment community. So there's some of these over here with a QR code on it, which will give you some more information, and you can get on a mailing list. So when that launches, you'll see that. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the back. Craig Reger really is an amazing man. He has been with us since the very beginning when we started the group in 2015. So it's been 8 years now. And he's led all of our due diligence training courses over those years. He also manages all of our associates, and associates are younger entrepreneurs who really have an entrepreneurial spirit, and they want to put their shoulder against helping the ecosystem and helping startups by learning how to do due diligence and then working with our angels through deals. Because all of our CAN members, when they do due diligence, they're doing it on a volunteer basis. So associates are a great way, and we have many associates in the room. And Craig really oversees the work that they do, as well as overseeing all the work of the investor members doing due diligence as well. So please welcome Craig Redinger.
Thank you. Hold your applause to the end. Maybe it's not so good. So by way of background, I wanted to mention that between Arthur and I, we probably have done hundreds, literally hundreds of deals. So my background is international M&A lawyer. I did deals for a living for 45 years. Not so many angel deals in that arena, but a lot of private equity deals, cross-border private equity deals. My expertise was German clientele that did business around the world, including a lot in the United States. I wanted to mention, so that by way of saying there's a lot of expertise in the room. There's a lot of different expertise or different experiences in the room. So please, this is not going to be a lecture for 2 hours or an hour and 45 minutes. Please interrupt, raise your hand, ask a question. If I don't have an experience with what it is that's on your mind, perhaps Arthur does or somebody else in the room might. Yeah. But a couple of things to start. The marketplace, as you know, and I want to underscore it because it'll be a theme that runs through the presentation. The marketplace and what we're doing as angel investors or as entrepreneurs is dynamic. And you'll find that both the market, the company, the entrepreneurs, the initial team, all of that most likely changes over the course of time. And so one of the things that we go into these deals looking at is what might change, what will change. And I'll get to it later, but I always love to use the example of the 5-year financial projections, which if you've ever looked at them, you should conclude immediately are wrong 3 weeks later, right? So that's a good example of what I mean by the dynamic nature of this type of investment. We'll also talk about typicality and tied in with the notion that things are dynamic. Yes, there are typical ways of doing angel deals. There are typical terms in a convertible debt instrument. There are typical terms in a term sheet, but typicality does not mean rigidity. And a lot of what I described to you is the way we've seen deals done, the way they typically are done, if you will. But by using that word and by describing those terms and the forms that we use or the deal structures that we see, I don't mean to indicate that flexibility is not available or warranted. Many entrepreneurs come to us now with Cooley documents. You know, there are massive numbers of documents, Y Combinator, Cooley, and all sorts of documents that one can find online. Perfectly fine. Many of them, Cooley's documents, we see all the time because they're cheap and they're fairly complete. And a lot of entrepreneurs know about them. They become fairly typical. But the fact that they are used that frequently doesn't mean that they are not malleable, that they're not subject to negotiation. The last thing I want to mention is that throughout the presentation, I may not articulate it precisely this way, but the old saw about investing in the jockey, betting on the jockey and not on the horse applies fundamentally to what we're doing in the angel investment arena. we are unfortunately left with subjective analyses, usually of the entrepreneur, particularly if it's a new entrepreneur to a startup. So we're trying to use various tools that sort of will surface through this presentation to try to figure out, is this an entrepreneur that can carry this idea to fruition and hopefully to an exit. So with that, let me start. And already this.
Say time's out after too long.
Get it?
So while I'm talking from the perspective of leading the deal, I think it's always helpful if you're an entrepreneur in the audience to think about what I'm talking about, because it ought to inform you in the way in which you're presenting your opportunity, so to speak, to the investment community. Leading the deal is a term of art that Charlottesville Angel Network has developed, because when we are interested in a deal, one of the members takes the deal lead and leads the deal. Doesn't mean that other members are not involved, they are, but the deal lead is charged with sort of getting it done. In order to lead successfully or to be a successful entrepreneur, you need to understand both perspectives, the investor and the entrepreneur's perspective. Not only understand it, but also see to it to a certain extent, to a large extent, that the interests of both are aligned. Yeah. Very frequently, we see situations where the entrepreneur doesn't understand the investor's perspective and vice versa. The old story about, an entrepreneur with an idea, a cup of coffee and a dog, thinking his idea is worth $12 million, versus the investor who thinks it's worth nothing, and both parties trying to understand each other to come to a deal that makes sense for both. Be conversant with deal terminology, obviously. Over the 8 years that I've been doing this, we see ever more entrepreneurs who are conversant. There's a massive amount of stuff on the internet that one can read and get conversant with deal terminology. There is all sorts of resources in Charlottesville and Virginia and elsewhere with respect to educating people to what deal terms, not only what deal terms are, but what they mean to an entrepreneur and to an investor. Recognize what makes a deal fail. And again, the theme here I would underscore as one important element of what makes it fail is the team. Who is the entrepreneur? Do they know what they're doing? Have they experience? Do they have stick-to-itiveness? Are they smart? Can they pivot? Do they understand finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Then always solicit sufficient information. Now, this is an interesting, and it'll also inform our discussion about due diligence with respect to startups. Some startups have a product in the marketplace and have a full C-suite team, and they're fairly sophisticated. So you can get a lot of information about it. Other startups are the old dog and cup of coffee and an idea, and there is not much information. It makes the decision for the investor community much more difficult, but it places a whole lot more emphasis on the entrepreneur, him or herself. Do thorough due diligence, and I'll come to this in more detail. Identify red flag issues. One of the ways that I found is helpful to the investment community and also to the entrepreneurs is to really look for what I call red flag issues. Red flag issues are issues that are odd, strange, appear wrong, or I don't get good answers from, and I flag them. I'm not trying to teach a course. I had 40 some attorneys that worked for me that we trained to do massive amounts of due diligence with publicly traded and big companies, et cetera. We don't have that. Hopefully, if we don't want to do that, we don't want to get educated to doing a 40-page due diligence memo like it would be done in a large law firm. What we want to do is identify issues, and if it's an employment issue or it's a patent issue or it's an issue that revolves around some specialized knowledge, then we reach out to our community, whether it's Charlottesville Angel Network or outside that community, and find expertise, particularly if it's a very important issue. Very important issue, for instance, would be the entire valuation of a company rises and falls on one patent. Now, then we would probably want to reach out to a patent expert. I do this, reach out to my partner who litigates patents and say, hey, Dave, is this a good patent or not? That's a resource that is available to us because I was a partner with them. Otherwise, it costs money. But if it's gonna hinge, if your decision to invest is going to hinge, or you're an entrepreneur looking for an investment and it hinges on one patent, and boy, that patent better be understood, investigated, and be able to be defended. Understand capitalization table and waterfall. Everybody, I hope, understands what a waterfall is. And this is very important. And it's also one of those tests of the ability of the entrepreneurs to understand what they're getting themselves into, because it may be a predictor of failure or dissatisfaction. What I mean by that, I'll go into it again in detail a little bit. A waterfall reflects the beginning ownership of the company. And I have an example later. You own 100% of the company, you raise $50,000 and you give away 20%. And then the next round, you give away another 40%. And all of a sudden, the waterfall is that tracking the interest of all of the equity owners or all of the owners of the company. And you want to do the waterfall, you want to understand the waterfall, and you want to make sure the entrepreneur understands the waterfall, because you don't want to get in a position where in your C round, the entrepreneur ends up with 0.6% of his or her company. That's dangerous, and that's something to be avoided, and it's something to be avoided or understood on the front end, not the back end. Negotiate the term sheet. Interesting, again, I think you would agree, over the years that I've been doing angel investment here, we've seen ever more rigidity about the term sheet. There's more startups coming to us with their term sheet. The earlier days, we would negotiate the term sheet more. Now it's become a little bit more rigid. Entrepreneurs seem to be a little bit more conversant with terms, and it's become more difficult to negotiate. And then the form of the investment vehicle has to be decided on. At Angel Network, we use a Virginia limited liability company, because it's easy that the manager of the limited liability company is one person, and that's the only person the entrepreneur has to deal with. It's just easier than having 27 investors dealing with the entrepreneur. So, interesting point is to understand, why do angels invest? Now, if you're an entrepreneur, you may not have asked that question yet. Frankly, if you're an angel investor, you may have understood fully why you're investing, why you're giving people money. Angel investors are accredited investors. That means they've got $1 million available. They're wealthy individuals generally. Some are much wealthier than others. Some have allocated a certain percentage of their liquid resources for angel investing. Some haven't thought about it. Some are simply looking for an interesting deal and are investing in what comes along as it comes along. But the motivation is interesting. And here, I'm somewhat speculating from my own experience, okay? Yes, people want to make money. But I think if you ask the 70 members at CAN is the Charlottesville Angel Network. Now I'm going to say CAN, it's short. Most of them would not say the first interest is making money, because obviously it's a highly speculative arena in which we're operating, right? Angel investing is not one where you go to with surety to make 10 times your money. So money is there, yes, great to make money. Tax relief, there's some interesting Virginia tax credits, some federal tax credits. There's a lot of push towards creating new jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Virginia and Rebecca is a good resource for those kinds of things. So that's a motivation, sure. The more subjective notions, more subtle notions of mentoring, that turns me on. I like to mentor young people, because as you get older, you'll find it's really nice to have somebody listen to you. So you actually think you have something to say. So mentoring is a good one. Giving back is sort of the same thing. Advising, valuing wisdom. To have a young entrepreneur, help a young entrepreneur or a new entrepreneur get to where they need to go by virtue of you or me or an angel investor having seen 47 different ways to get there, and maybe keeping that entrepreneur from doing something stupid or wrong.
Learning. I've found, and I think most of my colleagues would agree, I've found that I learn a whole lot about new stuff. We have what, Tracy, 66 portfolio companies?
Yeah, that's about
And I learned, you know, personally about this distillation.
Yep.
I've learned about enzymatic fungicides and dive technology and all sorts of stuff in between. What?
Drones.
Drones. And drones that stay up, actually, and stuff like that. So the point is, kidding aside, it's really interesting to learn about what it is that the entrepreneur is doing. And obviously, in order to invest in these companies, at least, again, personally, and I think my colleagues share the notion, it's interesting, it's important to understand what the entrepreneur is doing. What is the technology? Yeah, so that you can do due diligence. Later on, we'll talk about part of the due diligence, obviously, is looking at the competitive landscape. If you don't understand the technology, it's very difficult to understand who may be competing with that technology. And then the last is, I've been very happy to hang out with a bunch of interesting folks. 70 or so members from every walk of life you can imagine. So, angel expectations. So when you're entrepreneurs, when you're talking to angels, angels probably have something like this in their mind. They're thinking, well, you know, some of these companies are going to exit at about 2.5x. If you build a portfolio of angel investment, this comes from data, by the way, that's now 4 years old. I don't know what the new data says, but this is what it was. Hold period's about 4.5 years. And again, these are averages, which kind of don't mean much in terms of our own experience because we're a little bit different. But the bottom line question is, what's the exit? And I'm going to come back to that because we've had some interesting experiences in our entrepreneurial efforts with respect to companies that don't exit. Something that I didn't talk about last time I did this Getting a Deal Done talk, which has now come to the fore, and it's interesting. And I'm going to ask all of you what you think, how one might deal with early on in the deal documents, a company that might just become a lifestyle company and might never exit. So, whoops, went backwards, sorry. So some attributes of, and again, this is my experience, distilling 8 years worth of experience and then another 45 of big deals. But I think sometimes we get actively involved. Now, I said board members, advisory board. We don't, at Charlottesville Angel Network, we typically don't take a board seat. Some of our companies don't really have boards. They have advisory boards. Active involvement, though, can be enormously helpful, obviously, depending upon the entrepreneur. There are entrepreneurs that have done it twice. They've exited. They're, you know, made $100 million on the last deal. They know how to do it. They don't need our advice. They're good at it. Most of the entrepreneurs do not fall in that category, and it's helpful to have active participants. Don't have to be advisory board. Doesn't have to be anything formal, but an openness to active involvement on the part of the entrepreneur can be enormously helpful in you deciding whether or not that entrepreneur has what it takes to be commercially successful. If an entrepreneur says to me, no, I don't need any help, or is not open to suggestions as you see the company unfold, then I begin to worry about the entrepreneur. An entrepreneur with a closed mind is someone who's very likely not going to make it well. Investing in areas one knows or can learn about, is a good thing. If we have 70 members that can, then usually in the audience, somebody knows something about the topic. Yeah? We have that advantage of having many, many folks with all sorts of experience. And so we have the ability to invest in areas that somebody typically knows about. Anticipating additional rounds. That's one of the things I said. It has two sides. One is the waterfall effect. So anticipating additional rounds means both for the investor and for the entrepreneur, what does my position in the company look like after round C? We raise 100 grand, and we raise $1.5 million, and we raise 10 million. What does that do to my interest in the company? What does it do to the entrepreneur's interest in the company? Am I okay with that? All of which is obviously highly speculative. It goes back to the notion of these 5-year projections and the exit in year 6, all of which is nonsense, all of which is false, but you need to think through it because it may have a profound impact either on you, the investor, or on you, the entrepreneur. As I said earlier, if your company's worth 15 million bucks and you got 0.2% interest in it and you work for 6 years for it, you're not going to be happy as a founder. In fact, you're probably not going to be around. Same thing for an angel investor. If my interest is reduced, diluted that far, I'm not happy. But I need to know that on the front end. So trying to understand the capital needs of a company is really important and really difficult, by the way. You start talking about capital needs 5 years out. You start with the projections that have been made, right? And then you say, okay, what is the basis for this projection? How did you come to the notion that you need one more salesman at $140,000 a year to generate 2x in revenue? And if the entrepreneur doesn't have good answers for that, then you got to dig deeper. You got to figure out whether or not you can take the risk of capital needs greater than what's projected or unavailable. That's the other danger to future capital needs, is that they're not, the capital's not available. So those kinds of things need to be looked at carefully. And then, of course, the big one is do adequate due diligence. And all of what I said is sort of part of due diligence. The value discussion, here's the valuation: an idea, a dog, and a cup of coffee. I love that analogy because, in fact, we've looked at some startups that are indeed, I don't think there was a dog involved, but it was a cup of coffee and an idea. And sometimes you can invest in an idea. Some folks are so good, so experienced, they know exactly what they're doing. Maybe it's a new idea based upon an old company that has sold and exited and done well. So maybe you would invest. But the value discussion is always a difficult one. And the example that I used is the radical one and the most difficult one, where this person, this entrepreneur, thinks his company's worth, well, it's worth $12 million because in 4 years, I'm going to have 10% of a $47 billion market. Therefore, my company's worth $12 million today. And if you're an equity investor, then you're going to discuss with the entrepreneur why his company is not worth $12 million. And that sometimes is a difficult, there are angel investors in the room, but that's a difficult discussion sometimes because the passion on the part of an entrepreneur is, on the one hand, something that you want. It's very desirable. It's a necessity to be successful. On the other hand, that passion can get in the way of a rational discussion about what a reasonable investment is. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, we go to convertible debt many times so that you don't have to have that discussion. And then factors down the road, I've mentioned a number of them, but there are always factors down the road that you can anticipate. And that, again, where are you looking to deal with factors down the road? You're looking at the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial team. Do they have the savvy? Are they smart? Those are the kinds of things that we think about. Is this entrepreneur really good? Can I trust that he or she is going to fix, going to pivot, going to move with whatever factors come down the road? Yeah, question, comment?
No, just mentioning you already.
I already caught the fact that I went back. I went forward, and now I'm backwards. So, term sheet fundamentals. Now, I emphasize again, these are typical terms. There are a whole bunch of other terms you can find in term sheets. I did term sheets at Fulbright for larger deals that ended up to be 25 pages long. Term sheets these days are relatively short, but they can be more complex. They can be less complex. Depends on where you are with the deal. Depends on where the entrepreneur is with the deal. And these are typical. You've seen these if you've been involved in the angel arena at all. the first and biggest question is it equity or debt? Am I trying to do convertible debt, or am I trying to do equity? Equity is just what it sounds like. I'm buying a piece of the company, right? And then you have that valuation discussion because I'm going to pay X dollars for Y% of the company. So you have to talk about what's the company worth. Debt, convertible debt is the other way that we avoid that discussion. Now, of course, there are safe instruments, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, which are not debt, but work sort of like convertible debt instruments. And we'll talk about that in more detail. But that's the first consideration. What is the entrepreneur looking for? And sometimes, quite frankly, a priced round is easier to do. You say, look, let's just get rid of all this convertible debt stuff and what the cap is and what's a trigger event, et cetera. Let's just buy 10% of the company. Sometimes that's just easier. Yeah. Again, it depends on the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs, in my experience, are always loath to give up pieces of their baby. So sometimes, many times, the equity negotiation or discussions run into a brick wall just because entrepreneurs don't want to give up a piece of that baby, particularly early on. They've heard that, don't give up equity early on because you have to give up a big piece for little money because your company's not worth it. Preferred versus common shares. I mean, if we're doing a deal in a corporate setting, we see, we've never done the statistic. You guys know how many of our deals are LLCs? Any idea? Probably 80-some%.
I would think.
Yeah. I mean, we see, this is a notion of preferred to common shares in a corporate setting. We see many more limited liability companies. And very rarely do you see a limited liability company with units, membership units that are preferred or not, although you could. Yeah. Certainly one way to structure an LLC. You could do it very similar to preferred stock in a corporation. And preferences, you may know, you can set preferences any way you want. It's just a matter of writing the corporate documents. A preference typically is a liquidation preference in a startup scenario. And liquidation preference is what the name implies. If the company gets sold, the liquidation preference gets paid first, and then everything either gets split up between both parties. If you're participating or if it's non-participating, then you get your liquidation preference, and then you're gone. Convertible participating debt. We talked a little bit about convertible debt. Convertible debt, we'll go into a bit later, but convertible debt typically has two elements: discount and interest rate. And it's carried on the balance sheet as debt. So there are pros and cons, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Preemptive participation rights, those are really important. And we had a couple of occasions in my experience where those provisions were not crystal clear, and it wasn't explained to the entrepreneur in a way that the entrepreneur understood what the entrepreneur was obligated to do. In other words, when a new issue came out, we invest, angel investment's done, the entrepreneur goes out and goes second round and raises another $200,000, doesn't bother to let first round investors know. So a preemptive right is just saying that the first round investors have an opportunity to buy a proportional amount of that second round as well. And that's really important. Otherwise, the angel investment has no recourse. You can be diluted out of existence by virtue of new rounds. So preemptive rights are very, very important. Protective provisions can be anything under the sun. Usually what they revolve around, depending on the size of the round, usually they revolve around corporate actions that might have a major infringing effect on the investment, on the investor. For instance, the issuance of new stock. Usually in a seed investment, a small investment, you don't have protective provisions. In a larger investment, protective provisions are typically negotiated. And some can be pretty rigorous, where you start setting monetary limits. For instance, the company may not enter into any contract which would involve compensation in an amount in excess of 20 grand without the majority of the investors agreeing. For instance, Prepayment prohibition, that's typically just saying in a convertible debt situation, it's saying what the words mean. You may not repay that note before its term is up. Most favored nation, automatically adjust deal terms. Again, all of this, these are terms that as entrepreneurs or as angel investors, you're thinking about how they impact that company and my investment or the entrepreneur's company in the future. It's hard to do because we don't know what how that company is going to change. We don't know what the next round is. When you see that initial financial projection, it's going to say, and we're going to raise $1 million here in 2.5 years, and it's very likely not going to be true. And so somehow you have to figure out where you're going to be with various scenarios. In other words, what if $1.5 million isn't raised? What if the revenue isn't achieved in year 2? You have to wait another year. Where does that money come in the interim, et cetera, et cetera. Conditions precedent. This is something that we introduced a number of times in various deals where we found in our due diligence process, we found red flag issues. We found certain things that were just unacceptable. For instance, if your company, we had a company whose success was entirely based upon certain scientists' participation in the company. And their employment agreements did not have any non-compete clauses in them. So without a non-compete clause, which is valid in every state in the country except for California, without a non-compete clause, you can't prevent those critical scientists from getting dissatisfied with the entrepreneur and saying, adios, we're going to go do this down the street somewhere. So a condition precedent was written into the term sheet. What it said is, we will do this, we will make this investment, but the employment agreement has to be modified. It has to include valid non-compete covenants. Real simple, but that's the kind of thing that comes up in due diligence that is a big red flag that we can fix by adding conditions precedent to the term sheet. Questions so far? So other terminology, pre-money, I think most of us are pretty well aware of pre-money and post-money valuations. Those go into the calculations in waterfall situations. They'll go in the term sheet usually. Price per share and unit is obviously what it says. So what goes into the capitalization table in waterfall? This is important, and I'll show you an example in a moment. A simplified example, and some of these can get pretty difficult to follow because as rounds are raised and different things are promised to different people and the terms of the convertible notes change over time, the waterfall becomes a real headache. And so depending on the stage of your investment or the stage the entrepreneur finds themselves in, it can be very difficult to do an accurate waterfall, but I've always encouraged the founders to do one. Yeah. Let's sit down, you've got your financial projections, let's sit down and do a waterfall and include all of these things in that waterfall. Show what happens in multiple rounds with participating and non-participating preferred shares, what happens to the liquidation preferences, actually do a calculation. The end result of a waterfall is the exit. Now what happens to the money? I've exited for 40 million bucks. Now who gets what? And those waterfalls might be a list of the 4 founders, 3 directors, 2 employees, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rounds of investment. And it all flows through the waterfall. And at the end of the day, you have percentages of each of those equity owners. Now, the convertible debt has converted, the stock option plan has vested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of the day, the 40 million bucks is split up among those. The liquidation preference first, they invested 5 million, they get a 2x lick, so $10 million goes away. Yeah. And what happens to the rest of it? That's a waterfall. And that's so important because investors do that rarely at the beginning. Sorry, entrepreneurs do that rarely at the beginning. Investors less really, but still not often. And it's really important because what happens is along the way, 2 years in, 3 years in, people are getting traction. They're starting to raise. They've raised 2 rounds. Now they're going to go for a big round. And then they do the waterfall. And then they're shocked to find out that if they raise that $10 million, then their interest in the company is reduced to a point where they're really not interested very much. We had I don't know if I attributed to that phenomenon, but we have an experience with a startup where all of a sudden the entrepreneur was off doing something else. And I always had a suspicion that it was a result of doing a waterfall and going, oh my goodness, I've got 0.6% of a company and I don't want to do this anymore. So he went off and did something else. Anyway, these are the elements of the waterfall. I can't emphasize it enough how important it is that it be done, and that it be done with an understanding that it's all dynamic. Yeah. You have to make assumptions, you have to justify those assumptions, but you also have to be aware it may change. I may not exit 6 years from now. I may not exit for 8 years. How does that look? Et cetera. Here's a seed round and A round, just real simple. This is probably too simple for you folks. This is simply how it looked like at the beginning, yeah? What the percentages looked like after a seed round of $750,000, and what happened after the A round at 3 million. But it's interesting, the co-founders had 90%, and they only raised 3.75 million bucks, and now they're down to 48%. So you can imagine what this looks like if now I put 2 more rounds in here, and the rounds are not 3 million, but 6 million, and the next one is 10 million. I didn't calculate it out, but it's probably down to 22% or something. Now, your answer would be probably, well, 22% of $1 billion company is great. That's fine. Again, it goes back to trying to understand what the competitive landscape is, what this company is valued at, and how I exit in a marketplace that may be full, may not be appreciative of your ideas, et cetera. So again, I already talked about that. What?
So I understand the waterfall because this is the second time I've come. The first time I didn't, now I do. How do you calculate, or how do you put into calculations like liquid preferences for if you're a seed round investor or even an investor, not knowing what those are going to be in the future? Because a lot of terms, a lot of that comes up in later terms with, I'm going to just say, bigger investors who can. If an angel group is going to write a $500,000 check or $100,000 check, whatever, and then in round B, someone's going to write a $25 million check, they usually bully or can push the company a little bit more, and it could screw the earlier investors. So how do you put that into this calculation here?
Well, you have to go back. The exit here is what you're talking about. The exit has to be put in based upon what you anticipate, which is what's so difficult to do. And you're right, the big investor is going to come along and say, well, look, the liquidation preference that you gave Charlottesville Angel Network, it's got to go. We're not giving you 25 million bucks. So again, talk about dynamic marketplace. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you've got a check for 25 million bucks, you're going to dictate the terms. What typically is well, again, there's no typicality. What is helpful is to have as good a basis in your angel investment as you can, so that you have something to negotiate with. But you're absolutely right. You're going to lose. Very likely, you're going to lose the liquidation preference. Would be my experience. And I've done that. I've negotiated on the private equity side. We always did. If I had 50 million bucks or 100 million bucks, we just said, here's our term sheet and take it or leave it. And we didn't negotiate. So the angels, they didn't lose, they just got diluted. And the hope was, of course, if you're investing 100 million, the company's worth 500 million. And so you got a little piece of the big pie, which is perfectly fine.
Craig, do you want to touch on safes at this juncture?
I actually have a slide on safes. And you know I hate safes, so
No, I
be
think
prepared.
So I didn't want to upset you, right?
That's right. I want people to argue with me about safes.
Did you come prepared?
Here's a waterfall. So here's
Lorraine, can you see?
a seed round. Here's the A round. Same thing you just saw, right? But to your point, Chris, here's what happens. Here's an exit at 10 million bucks. If there's no liquidation preference, that's how the money's split up. If there's 2x non-participating liquidation preference, what that means is the preference gets paid out and then you don't split up the proceeds. And that's the remainder. So out of a $10 million exit, if there's a 2x participating liquidation preference, then they end up with 1.92 million bucks out of 10. Yeah. So lick preference, and I see less of them these days. I don't see that as frequently. That was something that Silicon Valley came up with 10, 15 years ago, and it was common. And now I don't see it so much. But that's what happens. And that's the kind of thing that you have to do, is what I was saying earlier. There's a perfect illustration of what you need to do. And this is really simple. They get much more complicated than this. And this is what I would do is if somebody's negotiating for a liquidation preference with you, then I would put that in there, or anti-dilution provisions. We're not going to go into, ratcheted, fully weighted and all that stuff, because it gets really complicated mathematically. We don't have time to do that. But if you're dealing with those kind of provisions in negotiation on either side of the table, then what you want to do is this. You want to plug those in to that kind of exit. Yes, to your point, who knows? Is the exit 50 million or two? But whatever it is, you can plug it in there and say, okay, well, if I give them lick preference and I give them anti-dilution provisions and I have a down round earlier, this is what I end up with. And it may be perfectly fine, but the exercise may disclose to you, the investor, or to the entrepreneur, what it is about the terms that you're negotiating that are unacceptable. Okay?
So Craig, are you saying that you're seeing less of, in my small mind, 1x participating preferred? That's a good place for people in the macro to start. You're seeing less of that in today's world?
Yeah, but again, it's my experience. So I'm seeing less of it. You might check Angel List's report and see what, terms they're seeing more frequently. Angel List, by the way, is a good platform. Would you agree, Arthur?
You mean Angel Capital Association? Or Angel?
No, Angel List. They do a report every 2 years or something, and they sort of give you, what percentage of the deals are convertible debt, what terms are common, and how frequently the terms. I saw it on Angel List. I don't know. That's one resource.
Sure. The other one too is Fenwick Invest. They put out all kinds of data.
Right, Cooley does a survey, there's a Halo report, the Anti Capital Association report, all those have good comps for what sort of valuation, investment rounds, terms of investment rounds there are out there.
And it's worth looking at those, but your negotiating position, in my view, is not strengthened greatly by saying, well, 67% of the deals done are done with convertible debt. Yeah, maybe that's a little bit of evidence that it's acceptable to 67% of the folks out there, but I'm not sure it persuades someone who doesn't want to do convertible debt. Okay. So convertible debt, convertible notes, it avoids the valuation discussion, which is the reason we see it most frequently. Interesting, Angel List said it was used in 37% of the deals in 2020, which I was shocked at, because we do it in more like 90% of the deals. Pretty close. So most of our deals are convertible debt, so we don't have the valuation discussion. So the reason there's a discount and an interest rate is that it's early. It's early in the company's life, so you're taking a large risk, which is what angel investing is all about. So you're getting a discount of somewhere between, I've got 10% and 20%. I think 25% is, we don't see that anymore. And interest rates at between probably 4 and 8%, although the interest environment now has gone up quite a bit. The interest is not paid typically, it simply accumulates. And when the qualified financing occurs, that's the trigger. So that debt plus the interest is converted into equity. That's the whole point. So you can see that the valuation discussion is delayed and it's actually given to another party. So the next round comes along, that financier provides the basis for the conversion. In other words, the qualified financing is typically something like an investor, an equity issue of $2 million or more. That triggers. Now, one of the things about these notes is that one considers, again, on both sides, is what happens if there's no qualified financing. These notes in Virginia have 3-year terms, 36 months, so that they qualify for the Virginia tax credit. But 3 years goes by pretty quick. And in that event, you have a debt that's accumulated, let's say 5% interest, 200 grand, 5%, 10 grand a year. So now you owe 230,000 bucks to the investors. And the investor, from an entrepreneur's perspective, has a good bit of leverage, right? You owe 230 grand, very likely you do not have as an entrepreneur 230 grand to give the investors. And quite likely the investor doesn't want 230,000 bucks, but it gives an opportunity. It gives the opportunity. No, it's usually simple interest is the answer, I think, to that compound
Okay.
interest question.
Yeah, somebody said, does the interest compound until paid? Just so the room can
It
hear.
accumulates, simple interest accumulates until it's paid. But it's paid, so to speak, by being converted into equity. So it just adds to the amount that's being converted. So if the new issue is $1 per share, to make it really simple, and you've got a 20% discount, then you're going to buy shares for 80 cents, right? You got a 20% discount. Yeah. But you've got a little bit more than 200 grand. Now you're buying shares at 80%, but you've got 230 grand to spend, if you will. Yeah.
What is, touch on the Virginia 3-year rule again?
Yeah, the Virginia equity, what's it called? Yeah.
I need to look it up.
There's
But
a-
it's the Virginia Investors Tax Credit.
Yeah, and in order for debt to qualify, it has to be of a term no less than 36 months. And it has to be a company of a certain sort.
And there's no state edict that it couldn't be extended or it has to be repaid. It just has to be at least 3 years under its initial term.
Correct. Because as soon as it's issued, as soon as the note is issued by the company can apply for the tax credit. It's a little bit, I don't want to go into the process. You have to apply for it. Virginia has a pool of money every year. You apply for it. They issue an edict about what percentage of your investment you should get based upon all of the companies that apply for it. We've gotten up to, I got 39% of my investment back 1 year.
So this, just explain quickly this year. This year, it's up to 25% of your investment back, but it has to be an investment in a company that you invested in between July 1st of 2020 till January of 2023, and the business needs to have less than 5 million in revenue and have raised less than 5 million in that time period. Actually, sorry, not that time period, less than 5 million total. And so that pool of money was reinvigorated this year, so investors can get that credit.
I have a similar question. Are there any rules about how short the note can be? Can it be 6 months?
Sure. Sure. But that would be strange, simply because you know the company's not going to have
Right.
qualified financing. But it converts whenever. It's a 3-year note, but a qualified financing triggers it automatically. Yeah. But it's something to consider. And I'm not going to go into the various methods of dealing with it, but it's certainly a point to consider when you're negotiating these things is what happens if there's not a qualified event. Parenthetically, that's one of the issues with safes. It can go on forever. Yeah. At least with the debt situation, you've got a point at which you have to sit down with the entrepreneurs and talk about what do we do now? Yeah. And usually it's extended. It's usually not a big deal, but it's something that gives, I like it because it gives you an opportunity. It gives you a lever. Yeah? The entrepreneur has to sit down with you and talk about what you're going to do with that debt. A safe, you have no leverage whatsoever.
There's no cliff.
Yeah. So here's a convertible version to be a little bit more mathematical about it. So the interest rate was 10%, the discount was 85% or 15%. Qualified financing was 3 million, pre-money valuation was 6, so the post-money valuation is 9. Qualified finance 33%. In other words, the qualified financing bought a third of the company. Interest on that debt for 24 months was 40 grand. Conversion amount therefore was 200, which was the original investment, plus the 40 grand that interest accumulated. So the discounted conversion was a total of 282,000 bucks, and the note holder ended up with 3.14.
Can you explain the discount again?
And the discount is simply if the qualified financing is buying stock for $1, the discounted, if it's 80%, is buying the same stock for 80 cents.
So Craig, you explained it to me way back when I first started in that's the discount for the angels taking the risk early on, right? The angels are coming in before it's proven, before the traction is there. So that's why that incentive and that discount is provided.
Yeah, absolutely.
Angels de-risk the deal for later stage capital.
Well, it's also just an earlier round, right? I mean, the money should provide enough runway for the company to go another 18 to 24 months. You're not pricing the round right then. Obviously, the company was worth less than, well, I mean, if the company's going along successfully, it should be worth more in 18 to 24 months than it is at the date you're making the investment. So it should be worth less. How much less? 20% less, I don't know. 20% is frankly probably kind of cheap for 18 to 24 months of progress to startup, but you're also getting the interest rate. But I mean, part of the reason you're getting an interest rate too is you're hoping to invest in something that's earning, 20 to 25% IRR. So it should be clearing an 8% hurdle, right?
At least, yeah.
To use your example, if you get, an 8% interest in 3 years, it's 24%, and then you're gonna get a 20% discount. So you're getting a substantial discount to the price round by the time of the conversion date between the interest and the stated discount.
But on the other hand, you're looking at a portfolio, not just one investment.
Exactly.
You know that
I've been told
Some
things
of them-
don't all work.
some of them don't work. That's right. Some of them just
Not
don't
here.
work.
But not in this.
Not in this room, they all work. And so the other element to convertible debt is you may have a cap. Yeah, so one thing investors like to do is say, well, look, if you go out and raise, your next round, and instead of what you project at $2 million for the next round, which we've labeled the qualified financing in this case, you raise it at $47 million, then we're diluted to nothingness. So there's usually a cap in a convertible notes. It varies, but recently we've seen $3, $4, $6 million as caps. And so that's the largest amount, the largest pre-money valuation that's permitted. So you'll convert to that, even though the company may be able to raise more money, which is even better. Obviously, if the company can raise more money, it probably is more valuable, and you've got a nice percentage of a more valuable company. So here's the safe slide. So in a safe, unlike a convertible debt, there's no maturity date. Yeah. It's just a simple agreement for future equity. Safe, right? There's no interest, no maturity date. It can have a liquidation preference. It can have a maturity date. The reason I smile is this, because Y Combinator, which is a big Silicon Valley outfit that has, I don't know, they've led hundreds of deals and been very successful. They came up with the concept of SAFE because they thought that by making it simple, they could allow founders to raise money more easily. Well, SAFE agreements that I've seen are as long as convertible debt notes, if not longer, because what happens is, unlike the dream that Y Combinator had, everybody negotiates safes. And safes can end up looking very much like convertible debt. I don't like them because there's no maturity date, as I described earlier, and there's no interest. So to your point, you're not making 24, you're not making that kind of return for the risk that you're taking in a startup.
The safe can have a discount to the next round.
Sure. A safe is a document, you can draft it any way you want,
And the safe can have a cap
sure,
to the next round.
sure. There's no statutory limitation to a safe. You can negotiate anything you want, and that, in my experience, that's what happens. And frankly, I never use it. I don't invest in safes, period.
And you do that principally because you do not like the lack of maturity date and the leverage that it creates.
I don't want to sit there forever, which is the potential here. And that's one of the things I said earlier, now is well illustrated. Same thing with a convertible debt or a company that becomes a lifestyle company. I really am focused now on having mechanisms in the company or the debt or somewhere where I can force, if you will. If I can't force an exit, I can force distributions out of the company.
How do you, didn't Novella offer us the same last week, 2 weeks ago?
We do have companies that come through with safes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Craig has a
Craig's,
personal-
yeah, that's Craig's personal
Craig
preference.
has a personal
There are-
preference, right?
So the entrepreneur sets it up. It's like, hey, if you want to invest, it's going to be a safe.
That's right.
You can do it or not.
Correct.
Okay, so you could like negotiate with them, maybe get them to.
You could say, I don't invest in safes, but if you want to do convertible debt,
Okay.
you got to do that.
Yeah.
But again, my experience, Arthur, interested in your take, or Chris, Jeff, is recent experience is that entrepreneurs are coming more and more with fixed terms. They're much more fixed in their minds about what they're willing to do, and there's a lot less negotiation than there was 8 years ago when I first started it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, over the last, 15 years, there's been an explosion in social media, right? With people tweeting, blogging, whatever. A lot of VCs, in order to help sell their brand, particularly since 10 to 15 years ago was when social media was still a hot investment area for venture capitalists. A lot of venture capitalists went out, got on Twitter and Blogger and whatever else, and wrote a lot about VC business. And so there's a ton out there. You can read extensive writing from many of the top VCs, whether that's Andreessen Horowitz or Fred Wilson over at USB, there's just so many guys out there that have written tons and tons and tons about VC. So a lot of entrepreneurs have already read all that stuff, have a pretty good idea of what term sheets look like, and come to us with much more professional term sheets than they used to. In the dark ages, if you will, entrepreneurs sort of came up with their own term sheets, or their, local lawyer did it for them, and you got a lot of times things that were kind of very screwed up. Right. Or an investor would offer terms, and in the same instance, those terms would be pretty screwed up. So there were also a lot of terms that professional investors would offer that were exploitive, I guess, would probably be what most people consider them today. And with all the writing that's now publicly available about the industry, you don't see those terms as much anymore. Like you don't see like full ratchet anti-dilution terms, which those are sort of like a thing in the past. You don't really see preferences as often anymore as you used to. And things are, I mean, there's also a lot of law firms out there like Cooley that offer template contracts for, you know, Series A equity investment for convertible notes. So if you get something that's really wacky for an entrepreneur, it's almost like a red flag because like, did this guy Google anything ever? Like, what is he doing to be so clueless?
Or to your point, he had a lawyer that didn't know what he was doing.
Right, yeah. So, you know, there's a lot more standardization of term sheets, but term sheets these days tend to be pretty fair. Where they've gotten, safes are probably where they've gotten most off track. And part of the reason that people don't like safes is there's a lot that's very undefined about a safe. And so they're dangerous for the entrepreneurs too, because a lot of entrepreneurs do them and they don't understand the financial impact that safes have on they themselves as entrepreneurs. Like it's very hard with the safe because partially because so many things are undefined, but also because a safe's value is based on the next round of financing, it's extremely hard to understand what the specific value of a safe is ultimately going to be. And an entrepreneur can end up with like way more dilution than they thought they were going to.
Exactly. Another reason not to flex.
And I mean, back to Craig's point, if an entrepreneur gets diluted too much, it almost destroys the startup because what is the entrepreneur's incentive to go and continue to pursue it at that point?
Exactly.
But if you've made deals with like 20 or 30, if you made safes with like 20 or 30 different people, I mean, I could go on at length about why safes are terrible, but if you made safes with 20 or 30 different people, I mean, safes also have no corporate governance in them. So the entrepreneur maintains a lot of control, but that also means that their investors are completely disorganized and have no central voice or ability to like vote on things or interact with the company. So if an entrepreneur does it with 20 or 30 people, realize he's been diluted out of the cap table and is totally screwed, it's like he's now the only possible fix is for him to go and negotiate with 20 or 30 different people to renegotiate the terms of the deal to get back to somewhere he might, that where the deal might make sense for him to continue to pursue. But whereas if you had actually done equity, you would probably have set up a board. The share class would be voted on by the share class, but there would probably be a board member or something that would take the lead there, and there would be like more sanity to it, right? So, I mean, many operating agreements also have that majority of a share class votes to do something. It forces the rest of the share class to do it. So you don't have to, I mean, you don't have to, like, part of the problem with negotiating with 20 or 30 different people is after you've successfully negotiated with 29, the 30th has a ton of power, right? Because they can make or break the whole thing. So you're totally, like, anyway, I don't know.
Well,
I'm probably just ranting at this point, but like, there's a lot of ways to shoot yourself in the foot.
So
I
don't
hope
use
some of
safes.
that makes sense.
I'm not gonna go into this any further, but he brings up an interesting question. So you get to an operating agreement, the safes, and let's say everybody in this room is in an LLC with us. So we're not a share class, or we're not a,
No.
how are we represented whatsoever?
You're not.
We're not.
It's a simple
Human
agreement
count.
for future equity.
Yeah, so it's
So
not
someday
equity,
you
it's
might
not
be an owner.
debt, it's like you have really no rights.
So the articles of incorporation bylaws would not even speak to our existence.
But could you give an example that's a little more concrete of a safe?
Yeah.
You just put a couple
You-
numbers, like you had some slides in it.
In the event that we raise $5 million, you have the right you will have 5% of that qualified financing. And if we don't, you're screwed. Now the agreement will say that. That's implied. That's all it is. It's just, it is indeed that simple. of course, then there are all sorts of terms that can be added to it. But that's the idea, is that the entrepreneur doesn't have to really negotiate anything. Here, you want, equity, we're gonna raise $10 million in 3 years. You just have to sit around, become comfortable with your safe, and when we raise that $10 million, we'll give you 5%.
So Craig, one more time. So we are unfortunate. We show up in front, you take a stand, we show up in front of the bankruptcy judge, it all fell apart.
Right.
The bankruptcy judge says, who are you and why are you here?
Exactly.
And your answer is.
I'm not supposed to be here.
hoping.
I'm not supposed to be here, Judge. I now
I
understand.
was hoping
Really hoping you'd
I
recognize
was
my
hoping the
presence.
company would affirm my contract. And the judge will
Yeah,
laugh, like,
so, I
he
mean,
just-
not to go like to beat a dead horse, but safes really only makes sense in the context of an auction environment. They were created as a term to use in auction, like a horse auction or an art auction or trading shares on like the New York Stock Exchange. That was what they were created for. Y Combinator is like the Harvard of startup incubators. They're the ones who created the safes. They have a demo day twice a year with a bunch of startups. They've sort of faded a little bit now in their influence, but at one point they were like the hottest thing ever, and they were at the heart of Silicon Valley. And their demo day was the hottest ticket in Silicon Valley. And they'd have a demo day, and like by demo day, each company only got to present for 2 minutes. And at the end, all the investors and the startups got to mix, and like you had investors literally like just throwing money at startups, right? So it became like a floor of the New York Stock, like, when you see like, it was a bad day on Wall Street, and everyone, like all these guys like throwing tickets around and yelling at each other. It looked like that, right? And so what a safe did was it simplified a communication of how someone wanted to invest in a company to a price and an amount of shares, right? So somebody could say, I want 5% for 2 million, right? And that made sense because everyone was using the same instrument. They were using a safe, but it was all predicated on the fact that after demo day, it was extremely likely that a large Silicon Valley firm was going to come in and do a Series A where they were going to do an equity investment from a name brand venture capital, Silicon Valley venture capitalist was imminent within the next 30 to 90 days, right? So at the moment, you're just trying to grab a piece of this startup before somebody else does with the safe.
So that was like because of their reputation though, right? Or selectivity on who they
Yes.
represent, and like everybody wanted.
Right.
Okay.
It was like all I guess another way of thinking of it is like the draft, right? Like the NFL draft or
or
something.
Lloyd's of London. Here,
Sure.
I want you to take part of my book, 5%, next,
Right.
the terms, nobody negotiated terms. You just sign the book and you got 5%.
So, but safes are a completely inappropriate funding vehicle for any startup in Virginia because no startup in Virginia is in that sort of frenzied environment of,
California.
whatever,
Yeah.
right?
So I'm looking at the 2022 Angel Funders Report, and in 2021, 56% of the deals were preferred equity. And then 33% convertible debts, including notes, and only 9% were safes.
I mean, nationwide.
Yes, nationwide.
Well, here it's more like 80%.
Yes,
You know,
yeah, just following,
Yeah.
national data.
So is that a
No, go ahead.
is that a red flag to you if an entrepreneur comes in and says they want to save and maybe their idea seems kind of.
It's not a red flag. I want to know why.
Okay.
My question would be, where do you get the safe? Why a safe?
Okay.
What do you think about a safe?
Right.
And again, anytime you have an entrepreneur talking is a good opportunity for you to do that subjective analysis. Does this guy know what he's talking about? Does he know what a safe is? Has he thought through what that means for his company?
Okay.
And importantly, has he thought at all about what it means for me as an investor?
Right.
And if he's got no answers to any of that, yeah, then it's a big red flag. But maybe he's fully articulate and knows the answers to that. And I go, okay, well, that's great. I don't invest in safes, but more power to you. Go
I
for it.
advise them not to.
So if they come to you and ask for safe, what in exchange you're gonna make, give them a debt instrument? Why would they issue a safe?
I don't know why they issue safes.
But I mean, it's a convertible debt instrument. Okay, I give you money. I have the right to buy equity on some basis,
a discount to a cap on the valuation or
Right.
a safe, what is it that's happening that would result in the issuance of a safe? Now, if are you investing, are you?
Yeah, you're investing on the basis of the safe. I
I'm
give
giving
you money.
in, but it's an investment in equity, and I agree that at some point. in the
No,
future-
it's
Investment.
you're just giving me, if I'm the entrepreneur, you're giving me money. And I'm giving you a document that says,
I say.
in the event that someday I raise, yeah, sort of. But an IOU, I don't have to pay back
I know.
unless I give you shares.
I appreciate those IOUs.
Well, yeah,
what
it's
if
like,
the
it's like a
idea
stock
was like-
option or a warrant.
What if it was so juicy to business or what, like, would there be anything that you would invest in?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah, there might be circumstances. under that.
Sure.
He's a lawyer. He's not gonna say no, but he's pretty much no.
Say no.
Right, I mean, just to be, I don't know, horse's
Well,
dead.
maybe that 90-day horse might be
Like, what?
you might invest in a safe if there were, for a fact that there's going to be an equity event in 90 days, like you were talking about Y Combinator.
Sure.
And those
Yeah.
circumstances, okay.
Well,
makes
I mean,
sense.
then my question is like, why did you come to me? Like, it's like,
Other red
it's like when a 10 hits on you in a bar or something, or whatever. And it's like, you gonna steal my wallet? Or you? Yeah, like, what is gonna?
This is wildly improbable.
Yes, exactly, right. But,
Big red flag.
but part of the reason people issue safes is because Y Combinator does it a lot. Y Combinator has written endlessly about how awesome they are. And so have a bunch of other VCs that are associated with Y Combinator. So like anything that's heavily marketed and perceived as prestigious, people go and do it.
And we're
Whether
here
or
to
not it's
resist
appropriate.
Y Combinator. That's our goal.
Yeah.
Let's get into due diligence. Forget safes. So I always taught when I taught my associates how to do deals in larger deals. Some of the principles apply perfectly well here. One of them is, one of the things we do when we write documents in a major merger agreement is we want to preserve the value. So a lot of, if you've ever seen a purchase agreement, corporate purchase agreement, stock sale or asset sale, there's a massive number of pages with respect to representations and warranties and covenants with respect to how the business will be conducted until closing takes place, all of which can be looked at as mechanisms to preserve valuation. So you've agreed to pay $180 million for this company, but you want to make sure that between now, once we've shaken hands and the napkin's been signed, and then that is when the deal is done, that valuation remains. Similarly, we want to make sure that the valuation that we're thinking this company has today and 5 years from today can be preserved. Okay? I know it's not an exact analogy, but I'm trying to give you some insight based on 45 years of doing something out there. So we're trying to preserve the valuation in our minds by looking at the elements of due diligence to see whether or not there are pitfalls that we can identify as red flags that we need to address. Yeah? So this is the red flag approach. And the valuation risk can be found in all of these things. CAN has a due diligence request form that I just cribbed from a major corporate due diligence form. It contains a whole lot of requests for information that, as I said earlier, may or may not exist, right? The company's just got a dog and a cup of coffee. There's not a lot of documents and not much exists. But if the company's been around for a while and it's used Cooley standard documents, it probably has employment agreements, it certainly has an operating agreement, et cetera. And those are the documents you want to gather and look at to the extent that they're available. So the valuation risk can be evaluated, if you will, by looking at these things. This is what we're looking at. And I've taken a number of these
in more depth in the due diligence process. So what happens in the angel network, and probably in every other angel network in the world, is a request for due diligence is sent out. A sophisticated company has a deal room where all those documents are available. A non-sophisticated company starts shipping you things or putting them in Dropbox, whatever, but you need to collect them. Not only collecting the documents being important, but also understanding what's not there. Because sometimes what's not there is a big red flag. For instance, if I have a company that's built on intellectual property of some sort, and I don't have an intellectual property assignment or agreement with the inventor, then the company may not own the intellectual property on which the valuation, if you will, is based. So the absence of a document can be equally as red a flag as other things could be. Here's a whole bunch of other things. You've got to, the idea of listing all this stuff is sort of, and these things are reflected in due diligence requests, is to give you an idea of all of these things that can be important to maintaining value, maintaining the valuation you think this company may have. Compliance issues. Is it in an industry where compliance is necessary? Environmental issues. Is it producing something that's environmentally dangerous? What is it doing with that? Intellectual property, as I articulated before. Many companies come up, we've seen a bunch, and I've seen a whole lot in my experience, where the patent portfolio is critically important. As I said earlier, a patent, as you should know, a patent is worth nothing. It's a dangerous misunderstanding in the community that I've got a patent, so my company's safe and secure. No. The patent portfolio might be safe and secure if patent counsel is really good. One of the things I described earlier is I send these things to my partner, and one of the things I do is just say, hey, Dave, was this written by a competent patent attorney or not? And a good patent litigator can look at it and go, yeah, the claims are formulated very well, or the claims are not formulated very well, and then you need to investigate further if the valuation is based upon intellectual property.
A patent portfolio means it's like small variations of
Not necessarily. It means a group of patents, and usually, again, no typicality, but many times a company will have patent, and then it'll realize there's another use, or 3, or 4, or there's another way of accomplishing the same thing. So it builds a defense portfolio. Gotcha. Usually, as a startup, you're building a defensive portfolio so that you can defend that critical patent against attack. Yeah. Later on, you begin developing an offensive patent so you can attack your competitors.
And there's also different countries as well. So you can have United States.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you can spend huge bucks doing patent work. A good firm, a good patent counsel, if it's a complicated electronic development, might charge $20,000, $15,000 to get a patent file. And a patent portfolio might be 6, 8, 12 patents. So
it
it's
needs to be that like multi-dimensional, like you said, to protect that one
It should be.
patent that's in the middle.
It should. I've never seen one patent be sufficient to protect a patent. Just doesn't happen.
And they'll limit you on how many claims you can make in a given patent. You can't just make all the claims in the world. We can start, but they're going to tell you, okay, we're going to limit it to that.
Well, yeah, there's a negotiation with the patent office, the patent agent, and there's a back and forth, and there's a patent jacket that has an impact. It gets extremely complicated. That's why the typical patent litigation in the United States costs $3 million. Wow. That's another reason that one patent for a startup is totally worthless, because if somebody's going to attack that startup, on patent, startups are going to go out of existence, can't afford to pay down, just can't afford it. And that's another thing to look at the competitive landscape and think about when your startup is going to compete against Bosch, and it's competing in an arena where Bosch makes $1.5 billion a year.
you better be darn sure that you're doing something really different, because if Bosch comes at you and files a patent suit, you're dead. And that's a good illustration of the kind of red flag that was raised. You go, wait a minute, am I really going to compete with people like that? Product liabilities, related parties, brokers, finders, all of this stuff is asked in the due diligence memo, and it should be stuff that is either available, or if it's relevant, like product, it may not be product liability, there may be no product liability involved at all in whatever it is that you're developing. But frankly, in this country, our litigious society, most everything can be litigated. So you got to think about it. Enzymatic fungicides. Well, if you're spraying those on crops that people are eating, liability, right? Drones flying in the air, well, it might fall out of the air, liability. Distilleries producing alcohol, liability. So product liability is something to look at very carefully and think through whether the company, because again, startup, one lawsuit, they're gone, right? And they very likely don't have product liability insurance. I don't think I've seen a startup ever that had product liability insurance.
Of course, you've got your due diligence checklist. So many deals come to us that have already been vetted. So for me personally, the first question is, who else has done due diligence? And will they give it to? Because there's no reason we're not here in Roseville. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We're all volunteers. And you don't have to prove its certainty, but it's a very good start because, if somebody's like another can is doing competent work, there's a lot of ground that has been broken.
No, I agree with that, but I would also say that I would always take that, as you said, I think, as a starting point.
Yes,
I mean, I have found so many red flags in the legal documents over the years. I found operating agreements that are just garbage, that weren't written properly, or that required the members to pony up additional capital, for instance. I found that in a recent deal we looked at. So yes, I think it's helpful to have
obviously they don't legal review, but some of the core.
the market, for instance.
And even we had one where, they did, maybe you'll get this, they had done background checks.
Yeah.
And so like people signed waivers and said, like, you can see it.
Yeah.
So I mean, if somebody is competent in front of us, there's no reason we shouldn't.
Oh, I agree. We should take due diligence material from any source we can get that's credible. Absolutely. Oh, this is back to where I started, and now that we're in due diligence, we're sort of using due diligence to illustrate both red flag issues, but also to reemphasize the notion of, as due diligence proceeds, you're interacting with the entrepreneur. It's not just you send a request out and you get the stuff and that's the end of it. Not at all. You get it, you analyze it, you find holes in it, you find things missing, and you're constantly interacting with the entrepreneur. Hey, Joyce, don't you have an employment agreement? Or what is paragraph 13 of the operating agreement supposed to say? You're interacting and talking, and all the time reading the entrepreneur. Does the entrepreneur understand this stuff? The biggest, this is old now, but CB Insights did this analysis of what makes startups fail. Well, no market need. Hopefully none of us are investing in companies that don't really have a market. That would be kind of a fundamental dumb thing to do. But running out of cash, not the right team, outcompeted, poor marketing, ignoring customers, losing focus, disharmony on the team, all of those in my mind add up to that subjective notion of looking at the entrepreneurs. Do they have those abilities? Can disharmony on the team, I mean, that, it's hard to detect, but if you have two founders and at some point along the way, they don't get along anymore, one of them goes adios, one of them had all the business skills, then you've got a company without a business leader, and then you've got a problem. Lack of passion. Don't use, that's the one I pointed out earlier, don't use network of advisors. Can is 70 people, all of whom are willing and able to mentor and help people along. If your investor's not interested in that, that's a red flag for me. Not the right team, ran out of cash, and no market needed.
So the team, betting on the jockey, not on the horse, ran out of cash as an illustration of those financial projections, which I'll put up here in a moment, and not understanding the assumptions that are being made. Now, we can't predict the future 5 years from now. We don't know if that company is going to exit. But we sure can look at the assumptions and want to know why that entrepreneur knows they can produce those widgets for $40 a piece. Where did you get that information? And then look, in the second year, you're going to increase production by 400%. What is required to do that? Why is that going to decrease your cost to $32? All those assumptions are built into the financial projections. And if they run out of cash, it's because those financial projections probably were wrong, or something happened in the marketplace. It was one of those factors that we talked about before that was unanticipated. The market issue is related to the timing as well. Sometimes it's not a matter of there's no market. Sometimes it's a matter of the fact that consumers are not ready for the idea. I forget which one it was, but we had one at Cannes where the conclusion was we didn't invest. The conclusion was, well, the market needs to be educated, so the consumers aren't ready yet. Might be down the road sometime, but they weren't ready at that point, and the education process was a whole lot more cumbersome and expensive than the entrepreneur had understood. Again, it goes back to this notion of the entrepreneur being passionate, fully engaged and fully invested in what they're doing, but doesn't recognize that the rest of the world doesn't really understand what the entrepreneur is doing, and the education process is slow and expensive. The team and execution, again, I can't tell you how important it is and how difficult it is to evaluate a team of individuals, whether they can do it or not. The blessing is when you have a team that's done it before, well, then you know you can do it. Yeah, but I think, I don't know, again, I don't want to exaggerate, but I think 80% of our investments are probably with entrepreneurs who have no experience. Is that fair? Is that too much?
70 are first-time entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
At 80%.
It's more than 50%.
Sure.
Yeah. Probably 60 or so. Anyway,
Yeah.
The point is you're dealing as an investor, you're dealing a lot with entrepreneurs who don't have any experience. So you don't have that advantage of having entrepreneurs who've done it before. So you don't know whether they're capable of carrying out. So you've got to find touchstones to figure out what evidence is available to me. And usually that's in these kind of discussions that I'm describing to you. So there's, again, unfortunately for you all, if you're looking at it from an angel investment point of view, there's not kind of a checklist to say, ask this, and this, and then you'll get the subjective understanding of whether this entrepreneur can do it. It really is moving with the information that you've got, so to speak. Pointed questions about assumptions, et cetera, the business models. The business model is, well, I've talked about it, I'm going to get to it. Funding, is it enough? We've seen several occasions when an amount of money was requested and you get into the assumptions that are being made and projections, and you realize, you try to educate the entrepreneur to the fact that they're asking for too little. And that goes back to the valuation discussion, that if you're talking an equity deal, a price round, and all of a sudden you say, well, look, you're never going to get there with 200 grand, you actually need 600 grand. But for that, you're going to have to give up 20% more of your company. That's always a difficult deal and a difficult discussion. But again, it gives you an opportunity to engage with the entrepreneur to figure out why they think they can get there for $200,000. And then, of course, if you're going to invest, you have to be convinced that that's possible. The market, this is taken from the CB Insights. This is why startups fail with respect to the market. And there were, 7 issues on that CB Insights chart that relate to the market. No market need is pretty obvious, but got out competed. We always do, obviously, a competitive landscape analysis. We try to understand what the competition out there is doing, and not only what the competition is doing, but what could they do? Yeah. Is it a marketplace where many times, you hear entrepreneurs say, well, we're the first in the market, and that's how we're going to dominate that market. Yeah, well, if Johnson & Johnson wakes up and puts $12 million at this, you're dead. So getting out competed is a real issue that can destroy the investment. Pricing, cost issues, poor marketing, product mistimed, talked about that, pivot gone bad, and failure to pivot. The notion of pivoting is an interesting one. We've had that happen successfully in some of the investments that we've made, where you have good entrepreneurs who are smart, who understand more than just their little niche. They understand the marketplace as a larger whole, and they get into trouble. They realize, for instance, they realize that the educational process for the product is too difficult or too expensive, or they run into a new competitor who's drawing them away, and they pivot. They take that company in a different direction because they're smart, they're capable, they understand the marketplace, and they understand that they can do something else. That ability, again, is something that going in is very difficult to judge other than on more general attributes of the entrepreneurs. Smart, articulate, real thorough understanding of business and their business niche. The team, these are eight instances on that CB Insights chart referring to the team. So I can't underscore too strongly how important it is that you be able to judge those jockeys. That's what it boils down to. There are many, many good ideas, and there are many, many startups that fail because of people, because the entrepreneurs just don't have it. They lose the passion. I've rarely seen it. I remember one entrepreneur that was so laid back, it was a shocker, but most entrepreneurs are very passionate, very articulate, very forceful, very excited about what they're doing. But that passion can go away. So one of the things you look at when you're talking about assumptions and time periods and raising additional capital is, does this person have that, this person have that passion 3 years from now? Does the entrepreneur anticipate growing the team? It's a rare individual entrepreneur or two that are going to take a team through the first 3 years, okay? Or take the company through the first. You need more people. More people cost money. Where are they going to find them? Who are they? What do they need? Can they manage people? So to take a real mundane, typical example, you have a scientist and you have a business person, and those are the founders. Great. Now, scientists don't know anything about business. Business people rarely know anything about science. So the combination of the two is a good start, right? But then you find that they need 3 salesmen, a couple of administrative staff. They got to hire a junior scientist as well. Who manages them? Can those entrepreneurs manage people? Wholly different skill, as anybody in here who's managed people knows. It's not the same thing as growing a company. And managing people is an extremely difficult thing to do, particularly to get out of them what you anticipate in your assumptions you're going to get out of them. How are you going to compensate the salespeople? Why are they going to come to this startup if they're successful already? How are you going to get successful salespeople to come to your company? Because if they're already successful, they're not going to go to a startup. What are you going to offer them? Are you going to offer them equity? Are you going to split up your equity holders a little bit more to bring good people aboard? Those are questions that you always ask entrepreneurs, because never are 2 entrepreneurs going to carry a company to commercial success. There's always more people involved, and there you can run into some serious problems. Cash, I think we talked about. Legal challenges, we hope they don't occur. I've seen them occur, but again, that analysis you do of the intellectual property that's held, is it attackable? And getting out competed is, again, it sort of goes back to the jockey issue.
Right, just one point on.
Sir.
On the cash, your comment about they need to, that number is wrong to ask for, you need to ask for a lot more.
Yeah.
The ancillary piece of that is, until they have to go through it, we witnessed it on this side of the table, how much time and money, time and energy is wasted for trying to raise money.
Yeah.
You take all the focus off the business, right? What did you do the last 3 months? Well, I went to 17 different locations to try and raise money because I should have gotten them first.
That's a really good point. And I think entrepreneurs many times underestimate the amount of effort put into raising capital. Yeah, the first 100 grand is usually relatively easy, but then when you're out for your $2 million round, it's a whole different ballgame. Now yes, you're still calling it angel investors, but now you're looking for a syndication among angel groups. So now you're talking to 10 different angel groups. It takes longer. It takes an enormous amount of time. Good point.
Hey, Craig.
Yeah.
Maybe worth noting too, for folks that haven't seen it before, that sometimes we'll do milestone-based releases of
Yeah.
capital, so we'll raise more than that of commitment, or at least get enough of the commitment that the entrepreneur can make a meaningful step in either the completion of the technology or demonstrating traction in the market, and then additional money would be released. So that's one thing to look at if, you have a concern about whether or not they can, one, raise all the money initially, and two, meet those milestones. You can take smaller chunks.
Yeah, that comes out of corporate M&A work. We always, not always, but 90% of the time, we had milestones when we bought companies. Yeah. So, and similarly here, it's not a bad idea, particularly if you're ensuring valuation, right? The company is telling you that they're going to have revenue of $20 million 3 years out, and you say, well, great, you have a revenue of $20 million, and we'll invest another $4 million, whatever it is. The problem is they need to know early on how much cash they need to get there. And then the milestones will be set in such a way that the cash comes in on the milestones in sufficient quantities that they can get where they say they're going to go. Yeah, this is the framework for due diligence. We first understand the company. Said this already, that we identify issues that affect the investor expectations, or in other words, what we expect the company to what value we expect the company to have. And these are always risk factors: the team, and then legal and financial and market issues we've already discussed. What tools do we have? Well, we have the investor presentation, which I think now there must be an industry of providing PowerPoints. All of them look very similar. All of them are highly professional. Entrepreneurs typically, they must spend an hour practicing what they're going to say. So most of them are very polished, etc. So the investor, the deck, as they call it, shows you what idea it is. Hopefully it tells you why that's important in the marketplace. What problem does that invention or whatever it is solve, or what is their company's goal in terms of giving the consumer something that solves a problem. Always interested in that. Who the team is, what the market is, and then of course projections. We only had one deal that actually didn't have projections. I had to actually ask for projections, which is strange. Then we send out the canned due diligence checklist, as I said before, and we get hopefully we get a whole bunch of documents back. We sift through those, and by this time, I've already got 27 questions for the entrepreneur, right? I've got the entrepreneur's deck, so I've got the entrepreneur's projections, and I'm already asking or prepared to ask the entrepreneur about those assumptions, like the ones I described to you earlier. I do, interviews with the team. Yes, you want to meet the team for the obvious reasons now that I don't think I need to state again, because the team is going to dictate whether or not that investment is successful. And I like to interview the team separately, just because sometimes you get different information from the team members, particularly if you've got standard scientist and business person. I love to interview them separately.
Lawyers are trying to create conflicting witnesses.
You're not suggesting. And then third-party sources are really important. Sometimes we talk to competitors. Sometimes you can call up a competitor and they'll talk to you very candidly about the marketplace
their struggles in the marketplace, what they think of new ideas, et cetera. We had an LED company which didn't go well, but to illustrate the due diligence, I was deal lead on that. And I called up competitors. It was a great idea, fantastic technology. And competitors were happy to tell me. I had probably an hour's worth of conversation with various competitors of that company, had a really good understanding of the LED technology as well, and had a good analysis of the patents, which were quite well written. That was actually the company where they didn't have non-competes with the scientists. Really. The internet, of course, USPTO is U.S. Patent Office. You could look up. You can also look up, you can ask somebody, a lawyer who has access to LexisNexis, which is the legal research system. And you can look up, I always do that. I look up the company and I look up the individual's names and any advisors' names and any companies they've been associated with, just to see if there's litigation out there. LexisNexis will show you litigation and judgments and things like that. So sometimes that's very helpful. These are just reiterating what we look for. Material contracts we ask for. It's interesting. When I say material contracts, what I mean is material relative to the startup. So if you've got a $100 million business, a material contract might be $50,000. You've got a startup that has a cup of coffee and an idea, any contract might be a material contract. I want to see everything that's been executed, any other agreement that they've made. And that requires many times cross-examination, if you will, of the entrepreneur. You want to know what deals did you make with mom? Yeah. Did you promise your mom 20% of this company? And very often you'll find the entrepreneur go, oh yeah, I did. I didn't put her on a cap chart, but I told mom she would get 20% of the company. So sometimes it requires a little bit of pushing on the part of the deal lead, if you will, to get the entrepreneur to think through all of the things that he or she's promised along the way. I think that's important because, again, the passion gets in the way of rational thought sometimes. Things are promised and said. And my co-founder, I told my co-founder XYZ, and I told my aunt that she could do that, et cetera, et cetera. And so you want to explore with the entrepreneur quite deeply what it is that has gotten that entrepreneur to where he or she is today and what things have been promised, what material agreements have been made along the way. Financial records, intellectual property, and business information is where I would focus a little bit of time, though I think we've focused a good bit of time on that already. Confirm the company owns the IP rights. That goes back to the point about an assignment. Yeah. Very frequently, the niceties of patent assignments filed with the USPTO are not adhered to by startups just because they're startups. There's nothing wrong with an entrepreneur, by the way, in my book, who has loose ends. Yeah, as long as loose ends can be corrected, I'm happy to deal with an entrepreneur that doesn't have his ducks or her ducks in a row. That's fine. We can do the conditions preceded. And many times as an investor, I'm not an adversary to the entrepreneur. I'm trying to help the entrepreneur get to the point where it's an investable business. So for instance, I'll say, well, I actually gave them an employment agreement. I said, here, use this form, please, because it's a good one and has a non-compete in it. I've given companies advice about how they should rewrite their claims in the next patent agreement. So it's not an adversarial relationship. I hope you guys understand that. We're not sitting across the table and trying to beat each other up. We're really trying to align interests. And the best interest for the investor is to get a company to invest in a company that is properly constituted in all these ways that we've been talking about. This is intellectual property, and I know we're out of time, but you can go in depth on intellectual property and make sure that they have treated their intellectual property as proprietary. Financial records, you want those projections. Business plan, if they have one, Typically, they don't have a business plan, but the business plan is sort of reflected in the financial projections. And here's what I was talking about with the art of forecasting and assumptions. There's always a forecast of growth and market penetration. There's usually no forecast of competitive response. There's usually an underestimation of the expenses. And financing and investment relates to how much capital do you need to get where you're going. Here's very typical financial projection. I just made these up. Base case, downside case, and upside case. And there's a few things here that immediately come to the fore. Revenue per customer goes from 319 to 666 in the downside case. In the upside case, it goes to 665 from 319. Why is that? You know, that would, to me, immediately create a dialogue with the entrepreneur to say, well, why? Second thing is, in year 2, I've increased my revenue by 411, or customers by 411%. Red flag. How's that possible? It's unlikely, but maybe there's a good answer for it. But if there's no answer for it, red flag. Anybody see anything else about what I didn't do was put an exit on here, but this is typical. The expense here, I've just got the expense, right? But I would want to know, I would want to unpack that, obviously. I would want to see personnel expenses. I would want to see what it takes to grow to 6,000 customers from 1,200 in 1 year. If it's a sales organization, am I hiring 3, 5, 12 salespeople? Where am I getting them from? What do they cost? How do you know what they cost? Do you have to incentivize them? Where are they coming from, et cetera? That's always a good point, because a lot of companies require sales. And I think that very typically the cost of sales is radically underestimated. And likewise, the time necessary. So that's something else. You look at these and you say, well, yeah, really, you're going to grow 411%, or is it going to take to year 3? And at what point do you need new capital? Now, in this deal, it's cash flow positive in year 2. Also unlikely, in my experience. Usually takes a few years to get going and be cash flow positive. And of course, cash flow positive assumes that the assumptions that you've made are accurate. So.
Craig,
Yes.
one of the things maybe worth noting here is when people are doing due diligence, one of the things that the Small Business Development Center can provide is what's called a profit sense analysis. So we can look at the industry and share what should the financials look like when the company is mature. What are companies of the similar size doing across the country or in other areas? So we can provide that.
That's really helpful. Those are really helpful insights, because they can inform your analysis of the projections companies make. Ideal, perfect.
Yeah. And on the flip side, you know, if the company is clearly not ready, which, you know, the screening committee does tend to send them to SBDC to get their market analysis, you know, get the business plan, do the projections, build the deck, and so on. So they can get that kind of help in Virginia through a number of organizations.
Absolutely. And at time. Any questions?
Yeah. Speaking of time, I'm curious what you typically see in terms of the due diligence timeline.
In part, it depends on the entrepreneur. If they're ready and they've got their data room full and they've been doing it for a while, then it's 30 days. Otherwise, it's anywhere between 60 and 90. Usually 90 is outside. Usually get it done in 3 months.
Chip baby.
Pardon?
Chip baby.
Yeah.
This question.
Unless you have a baby.
For Tracy and Arthur, what is the status and number of the associates that are now with CAN, and how many will leave in May with the end of the school year, and how many are staying on with us?
Most of them are not students. And I haven't even had a chance to introduce Craig to some of our prospective associates here. He came to our last dinner. And you can find the associates in GUST under members. I have them broken out in a subcategory called associates and interns. So you can take a look at them there. You know, we rotate them depending on a number of factors.
Some have interest in a particular area. We had a
Like medical.
medical doctor, PhD, who was really interested in biomedical stuff. He did a lot of good stuff. So and the associates don't have an obligation to do anything. Well, not exactly true. They have to work a little bit, but we're very flexible.
Yeah.
But they don't get paid.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
What does the final deliverable look like? Like, I know you're requesting all these documents and
Good question.
what actually is it?
So one of the things we do at our Angel Network is we require our members to sign a statement that says, I'm going to get a due diligence memo, but I'm not going to rely on it. And any decision I make is my own individual decision.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what the due diligence memo says, and I identify and hold anybody who wrote that due diligence memo harmless. Okay. It doesn't exactly say that. But the point is, kidding aside, it's a 4-page, 3 to 5-page memo that outlines the salient features of the company. So it reiterates sort of the deck, and then it'll give the competitive landscape analysis. It'll give a little bit of information if there was a patent analysis, I might write in there, reviewed it with my partner and such and such. Deal terms will be in there. And some of our deal leads put a recommendation in. I don't like to do that. Just write what I find.
So Craig, I know you like the 2-page end result, you know? You flog associates in oblivion, they have thousands of, but what is one step? So you've got the deal documents in the data room, and you have your 2-page end result with the vet. Is there an intermediate document that is in there that people have made up for you, or you go from documents to the 2-page?
Now, the way I do it is I ask the associate to analyze a particular, usually the competitive landscape. So they'll produce that analysis, and it's
You'll make some kind of memo or chart.
exactly, and it's usually a couple of pages, and I'll distill that into half a page to put in the due diligence. I've actually written 3-page due diligence.
Shocking.
And is all of that material generally, so if I wanted to see, as a personal matter, doing my own due diligence, that's in the document repository?
No, it depends on how we got it. So usually now we see people have deal data rooms or deal rooms, right? So they give you access to the deal room or access to Dropbox. And I put the link in the due diligence memo. So when you get the due diligence memo, if you want to see all the documents, you click on the link and you go to wherever we got
Does
it.
it take me to the associates longer?
No. I never put that anywhere. That's just mine to use. But, yeah.
And a lot of those documents, once you get them, you can have your associate actually upload them to the deal room in Gust, which the entrepreneurs don't see. They see just the top part. We have the deal room down below. So you can actually add all the documents directly. His is a shortcut, obviously, and you can add that shortcut to Gust as well. Also in Gust, for those in the room who are members and associates, in the document section, we have information on due diligence. So we have some sample diligence reports. We have the showstoppers. We have the old playbook. We have the due diligence checklist, and we have this presentation. And speaking of this presentation, like the last time we did this, we'll make this available to all the attendees.
Sure. Yeah.
So we can send this out to you guys as a follow-up, so you'll have that information.
Basically, where is the due diligence checklist within Gust under what tab?
Sure, it's under documents. So there's like members, events, communications, documents, and then drill down to due diligence.
Well, it's a lot of material to digest in 2 hours, but I hope we at least raise some questions. Any questions? My email address is on the back of this presentation, so you can get it in Gust. I'm happy to help. Oh, our favorite books, yeah. There's 2 books that we generally give out. One is Venture Deals, Brad Feld and David Rose's Angel Investing. helpful tools. These guys are gurus in the industry. They write well, simply, good introduction, or actually not just an introduction, it's good material on the arena we're all operating.
Well, thank you so much, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
Again. Awesome.